Dear fellow explorers, welcome to this new episode of the Pearl Dialogues. My name is Wazee, and together with Elin, I host this podcast. For those of you who are completely new to this podcast explores the nature of reality through the lens of the Down approach. And the Down approach is a spiritual path that basically leads to radical transformation of human being. That's my experience, at least. And in this particular episode, I talk with Duncan Scribner, who is a long-term teacher of this path. And he has also worked one-to-one with the founder, A.H. Almas. And in this particular segment and episode, we dive into what it means to work with someone for nearly 50 years. We also talk about the quality or the aspect of our being which involves not knowing, not being in the know, knowledge, not knowing. And another very interesting dialogue that emerges is around the future of this school, as many of the first students of this path are now growing into their 70s and 80s, and there is a shift in process happening. So it's a juicy conversation. I want to make a note that in the first part of the video, you will only see Duncan as I had my settings wrong. But then eventually when we start talking about the future of this school, I came to awareness of this and I was able to switch so that you will see both of us. So this information is for the YouTube watchers. That's all I had to say for now. And yeah, enjoy this episode. As always, I invite you to listen with presence, sensing your arms and legs, which is a practice in the Down approach, which supports us in being in the now. Thank you. So Duncan, I read from your profile on the ridwan.org or the Down approach website that you've been in the school since 1976. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. It was somewhere, it might have been 75, 76.
Yeah. And so I read also that you contacted Hamid the first time, Almas, Ayaj Almas, the founder of the Down Approach, over phone. And you had a
That's it.
conversation with him, and from what I gather, you've been working with him ever since.
True.
Yeah. Can you share a bit about hmm, hmm. I mean, it's such a big question that I realize when it comes to me, but that journey in of itself of working with a private teacher for such a long time,
Mm,
how has that been for you? How would you describe that relationship and that process?
mm, hmm Well, I'll frame it a little, as you said, um, that initial conversation with him uh, was extraordinary in a way. It was very ordinary, but at the same time, it says something about what the relationship has been all these years. Um, a friend told me about this guy, who was doing various things in and around Denver at the time. Um, I lived in Denver and was Boulder centered group, and she told me about him. I got the phone number, called him, and there was like an immediate sense of, I'm not going to say connection because he's on the other end, and I described a little bit, maybe I like to attend this or that. Um, but I both felt something and knew something uh, in talking with him. And is it voice? Is it, what is it, that I heard and related to? And that's been there throughout until yesterday, until now. The sense of ah, this person, this is coming from a place or knows something that I don't know about. Um, I won't say still, I feel I don't know about it. You see, back then, I don't know everything about it, but back then it was, I just knew, and starting with first meetings and so on, I just constantly felt there's something really, really valuable here. And I wouldn't have known what it was um, at the time. And still, there's mystery to it all. But so there's just a sense of, okay, this is an important direction. And I was a science guy then. I mean, I'll say I still am, but you know, I was working in a lab. I was, working with animal models, studying science thing, and I was very much of a science guy with a science mind. But at the same time, I think I had whatever curiosity, whatever leads any of us to explore this way was there. Um, and I could go on and on about that, how my science developed and this and that. But um, so the relationship throughout has had that element. Always learning, and of course, the school developed from starting with just this ineffable, what is going on here, through development of the Lataif and all of the various more specific discoveries, I'll say, that or articulations of something already known that, have continued and developed, throughout all these years.
Hmm.
So that's sort of the first thing I think of, in terms of what it's like. He's been a teacher for sure, a friend, um, and um, an extraordinary relationship. It's hard to pin down. You can't give it particular words. Teacher and friend are some of the words.
Hmm.
Magician sometimes somehow comes to my mind, but it's not like that kind of magic. It's more like there's more to be understood here. Always. You know.
Again, I'm reminded of how, if I do the math correctly, I think you've been working with Hamid for about 40 to 50 years. Is that correct?
It will be 50 in another couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah, soon to be 50 years, one-to-ones.
I keep telling him we need to have a big party here or some kind of event here in Colorado because here we've bought a new center. We're building it. It's a beautiful building. It needs a little bit of this and that. I'm thinking, oh, so I keep kind of nudging him. I don't know if it'll work.
Okay,
But
cool. A little celebration party.
mostly he doesn't come here these days for some time. It's
Yeah.
been more centered in California, and we go to big events these days, of course, through Zoom, but um, Asilomar events, what you probably do, excuse me, in Eindhoven
Yeah.
here. So we see him there, and this summer we will see him for the first time in a few years.
Due to COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you say, in your experience, is the value of having a private one-to-one teacher that you're committed to showing up with over time?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Really great question. Um, I face this question a lot because over the years, as a teacher and a organizer and a director of Colorado school functions here, we come to times where we have to, address this question. How do you let somebody know having an individual teacher is a good thing, is a really important thing for you? I always stop short of making it a requirement and saying you have to do this, you see. Um, and so my own personal preference is to let that come from the student, let them hear how other people are experiencing their individual sessions with their teacher, for instance, and let them find that they want to. Um, I think that's the best way to start individual sessions. But the different things can happen in the privacy of a session with a teacher, some of which can happen in a small group. You are working one-on-one with the teacher, but when it's just the two of you, not with other people observing around you, um, I think one can just feel more open to not knowing. Um, and in our work, of course, knowing is a thing because the map is so detailed and people's mind can be, believe that they should know. And, oh, there's this quality, and oh, I'm experiencing that quality. We can easily be drawn into that um, habit, which everybody has, to come from their mind, believe they should know, and all of that. But in an individual session, I think it's much easier to just forget all that. Um, and I think it's important for the teacher to also know that and to themselves let go of what they know. So I always tell people, I mean, it's been a long time now since I started working with anyone new. But back in those days when I did, I would always start a session by saying to the person, we're going to be doing something you haven't done before. It's going to be a little unusual. I'll have you on a mat. I'll have you just doing nothing or breathing or maybe making a movement of one kind or another or something. I might ask you questions, but mostly it's an adventure to find out what's going on inside you. And you don't need to know anything here. It's a brand new thing. It's adventure, truly. And most people, if the teacher can really communicate that well, it's okay to know nothing and to just be on your back and going, enough, right? Then things happen. I mean, thoughts happen. One's struggles can show up in a way without any kind of planning or judgment or anything else, and then with different kinds of breathing, for instance, things just happen. Things open up. But the most important part of that, I think, is just the embracing not needing to know. Just as important for the teachers, because we do know a ton. The map is detailed, and so if we could call it a map. And I think we all are instructed in a way to just let go of that. Don't be thinking about it. Just explore. And the more we can do that, the more the unusual can happen. And I think, as you know, most likely because you're doing this podcast adventure yourself, you know there's something about just not even knowing what the hell's coming next. And only that way, really, do we end up, discovering interesting things about ourselves, things that we wouldn't think about. You know, like really understanding presence. We think of presence as a thing, as uh, a thing to pursue, and so on and so on. But if you don't know anything at all, You know, initially, you might just discover a kind of stillness that we wouldn't necessarily recognize as anything in particular. Quiet, silence, stillness. What's that? And our usual mind, of course, tries to fill it and avoid it. And what's that for? Um, so that's the kind of thing I think we can easily find. Uh, well, not necessarily easily, but yes, if the setup is good, then that kind of magic can happen. It's like ordinary magic, as someone once said. You know.
Hmm. Now that you brought in the realm of not knowing, or really give emphasis to not knowing, I notice how that is showing up in the space. Um,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and,
Yeah.
and simultaneously, I have avenues of inquiries that we could explore even more deeply, one of which being going deeper into the process of working with a one-to-one teacher. I actually know from myself that it actually took me some time to really land with my private teacher. Um, I think it actually took me more than a year and a half to really feel settled with my teacher, which I'm experiencing now. Um, Do you see that there are different phases of working with a private teacher? Because you speak about the continuity, you mentioned the continuity, how the sense of connection with you and Hamid is still there. And then you also speak to, I mean, thinking about having worked with someone nearly 50 years is so vast. I can just imagine what you've been exploring together in those sessions and the journey of transformation, the journey of experience, the journey of exploration that you've been on personally, and then also and then with Hamid, working with him. So to go into detail what you've discovered in those sessions is such a vast universe.
Yeah.
So in terms of, do you have you observed any patterns, any specific changes or shifts in your relationship with Hamid, working with him, that you feel is worth mentioning from your personal experience?
Shifts in the relationship.
Yeah, or either shifts in the relationships or shifts within yourself that you feel is linked to the private sessions that you've been having and the yeah.
Well, I mean, the private sessions are always simply exploration of what is happening.
Yeah.
And again, to have that rigorous, and interestingly, to call it rigorous, you see, but I'm going to say it anyway, and I'll try to explain it. So the rigorous commitment to not knowing, not that someone is sitting there going, I should be not knowing. You see, so as soon as you're doing that, you're bringing in something telling you how you should be and everything, and that's hardly a not knowing space. Um, but that's been just naturally there, let's say, uh, in my relationship with him. Him, of course, more the not knowing than me, and me learning, I would say, over the years what that is. Uh, um, I have one way of putting this that seems useful sometimes. It's like, as I described earlier, when my first conversation with him, I wouldn't have said this then, but years later, maybe it was 10 years later or something, Hamid was here in our home. He stayed with us sometimes when he would be here teaching in Boulder. And I remembered noticing or feeling, oh my goodness, he is completely here, and at the same time, completely not here. So that, right, you get a sense of that. Like you're coming from a place, like the place you live. Maybe we call it the assemblage point or something, even though I think Castaneda used that in a little different way. But where you're coming from is some kind of completely not here, what we could call it vast something, vast space or absolute, whatever terms we might give it. You see, it doesn't matter. As soon as you start giving it terms, you're giving it location, and then you're making it a something.
Yeah.
Right. But I would say, no, the insight was, and of course, I was able to see this, and I would say that this is something that I have learned from him over these years. You're asking about shifts. So to notice that, and we were just standing in my kitchen, I remember exactly. I could tell you, interestingly, I don't know if you have this experience, but you sort of remember places you were when you, I would say, learned or discovered or woke up to something important. I have kind of visual memory of things like that. So this one, we're standing at our kitchen island, and there's a little espresso machine there, and we're just talking about something. And I didn't say that to him or anything, but a little later, I just realized, wow. And so the coming from some ineffable nothing place, but at the same time, completely here, engaged, talking. You see? So how do you understand that? Like you can be talking about something that's relevant for the moment in a way that's completely unattached to where it's going to go. It's just talking. It's like simple talking. And it wasn't like meaningless talking. I don't even remember exactly what we were talking about, right? You're just saying something. No, you're completely addressing something that's in our relational field, and yet his location, if we could call it that, and it's hard to find words, but was completely impossible to know. So again, back to the question of knowing and the importance of uh, for a teacher. Not that it was his intention, you see, to be standing there teaching me something. You see, we're just talking. But it brings back and focuses a little bit the importance of, well, I'll say for a teacher, but I'll say for anyone, for any student of inner work and inner development, to understand more and more about what is it to, like, allow yourself to be worked in a way to more and more understand that kind of greater depth. And it's sort of contradictory in some way for our mind to understand that, because we think, oh, we're going to get something, we're going to learn something, we're going to add something to our usual view, we're going to become more spiritual, we're going to, no, okay, I'm going to be like some elaboration of my usually known self. I'm going to add something, but really, things are being deleted in a way. But at the same time, one's able to show up in a way that appears completely and actually really very precisely present to, exploring, helpful, right? But in a way that there's no intention really, or no intention of a self that's trying to do that, or that's even engaged in that. It's like it's coming from somewhere, but you don't, where's it really coming from? so that goes to the question of the self, and of course, and it says, no, there's not a self doing that. It's usually a self where you feel like, oh, there's intention or there's an interest, or how you can feel with some people. There's like an edge. There's like things you could grab onto, and you feel they have a little agenda.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So like the sense of agenda in someone mostly has some kind of sense of self because it's important to them something happened. With Hamid, and I would say that I've learned tremendously from him, not just by observing him in the way I'm describing, but through the learning and all of the teaching and all of the learning and all of the experience that I've had to find out more what that is, to operate without any agenda. I know there's more to say about that. So
More to say about everything that's coming up here. Um, yeah, so for me, it speaks to the heart of open-ended inquiry. uh, this dialectic or dynamic of not knowing and knowing. Um, and I can see myself in this. So I see that while you're speaking, I have things coming up that I feel would be valuable to bring into conversation. So I'm using my memory and then saying, actually, I see the relevance of this. And then the moment I do that, I notice how there is a part of me that's holding on to the memory as to not forget. And
yeah,
simultaneously, I see the possibility of simply releasing that and then dropping it all together. And then I have an ongoing process of inquiry about, is there a place in, you could say, maintaining or holding on to that memory or that thought or that question that I had as a host? Um,
yeah,
no, what would you say on that?
a good question. Right, right, because it's like you're wanting to do something. You have a job here,
Hmm.
right? But at the same time, uh, I mean, part of our interaction and conversation is about what is it to not have a particular agenda.
Yeah.
So I think there's a balance. But I also think in my own experience, I just sort of I try not to do that. It's not exactly I try not to. It's more like I can be aware of that and just don't pay attention to it. And the questions really can show up on their own again, or in a little bit different form. But I'm not saying there's no place for that too. Of course, there's some place in our mind. I mean, there's a balance
There's a balance.
in our human lives that so we grow with a conditioned ego based in memory and functioning, and it's good to function well, and it's bad to function badly, and you know all of that. And then we also might discover, our deeper nature, as we say, or the possibility of just forgetting everything and completely trusting that the next question might come. Um, just moving around in our space, our home, or driving around town, for instance. If you're supposed to go somewhere, you want to go somewhere, you're going to go to the grocery store. I know what things I'm going to buy at the grocery store, but most of that can happen without even thinking about it by now, you know? And so moving from one place to another, we can be much less burdened by like somehow revving up our cranium uh, to functioning than actually we need to. You know what I mean by that?
I do know what you mean by that. Yeah.
And so would we call that balance? I think we'd call that like a kind of remembering, or a kind of letting go, and a kind of exploration uh, at some point, you know, just to be aware of those things. And over time, and I'm saying after many, many, many years, really, um,
Mm.
is the time frame in which we uh, might learn to move really naturally,
Mm.
not driven by um, our thought process, or our sense of I need to be doing this or that. Well, a very, 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 very long, long thing, long time frame, at least for me.
Yeah.
Well, I can say that.
It brings in the question of the doer. Who is the doer? The question of non-doing, and you could say the modus of operandi. Where are one coming from? Where is one located in one's own beingness?
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanna. I really hear you in saying that it's a real process of, you could say, arriving in a space or in oneself, or we're using words here, where
Yeah,
where functioning is happening on his own accord without anyone meddling with it. And then there is this open-ended exploration that is taking place by simply embodying the experience as it unfolds. That's how I understand you. Uh,
mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
experience can be anything, any dimension of 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 being, any dimension of essence, and any aspect of essence, or that ego activity may be happening without there being a latching onto it, or and if the latching on is happening, then there is also a meta awareness of that taking place. So there is a
Yes.
mental detachment in a healthy way from the content of experience. And I would also say that there is a very deep level of trust that is so intrinsic that it's not even formulated. It's such a surrender. Soul has surrendered to the logos, or to the universal unfolding, in such a way that things simply happen, without there
Yeah.
being this fundamental mistrust or a fundamental agenda in the
Yeah.
soul. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm remembering another time where I realized something, that on this question of balance we're describing. A lot of the time, I think we just are habitually operating and believing we're habitually operating according to history and what the world wants or needs, um, when actually we might be really coming from no place, as we were discussing earlier, but still functioning, being not here, but also completely here, right? I, I, that was one that really stood out. And so I mentioned that sometimes even in my teaching, because I think people get that. They get a sense of it. So it's another example of that one time that I realized, but I only realized it because it happened. And I'll say, I only noticed it because I'm interested in recognizing, you know, things of this kind. So I'm sitting here, this very desk, it's probably 20, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, and I was engaged in taxes. And I was working on numbers in a spreadsheet and so on. And so I was really, really in it. And I would say I was engrossed in it. where one might from the outside assume, oh, that you're doing something from history that, it's just what anybody will do, um, that everyone will do, various times. But then someone showed up at my house for their session, and I had forgotten about that person coming, which happens very occasionally, but happened. And, so the usual thing might be to go, oh, I made a mistake, or, to somehow, was I doing an ego-based thing of running numbers, or not? But the person stuck their head around the corner. They come into the house, open the door, no bell or anything. They just know they're coming. I just kind of looked up and went, oh, and then, okay, so no reaction, no feeling of something wrong or bad happened here. So then that helped me to see, I'm doing something that's a real world thing, but I'm just being sort of guided in doing it. Wasn't really me doing it in the usual sense. Does that make sense? That's sort of like, and so that felt sort of like similar to what I was talking about earlier, that we can function really well
Yeah.
and not have to be focused on functioning, not have to be thinking, oh, I got to get this right, and so on. In other words, all that was happening is a detailed, set of numbers and things to keep straight. Um,
Yeah, what I hear you saying is, or what comes to me is that sense of not having a fixation and not running a narrative in the background about what should happen, what ought to happen, and so there is an intrinsic kind of freedom that I hear coming through when you speak about that experience.
yeah, well, that's what it. Yes, that's good how you put it. You're catching it better than I said it, actually. But there's a kind of freedom in it. It wasn't, I have to be doing this.
Yeah,
There was the freedom in it. And then, you know, someone comes and says, oh, okay. And then, you realize, oh, I forgot or something, but there's no even thought about, I forgot.
yeah. I feel a lot of beauty hearing that actually rising in my heart, and there is such an intrinsic goodness uh, that I become aware of when you share your experience, and it has to do with the absence of that very tight sense of seriousness that
Yeah.
because I feel there's an absence of that in what you're sharing, and there is such a genuine, innate lovingness and an innate goodness that is intrinsic with that freedom, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that was saturating or saturates the field itself, so that everything can simply unfold with that sense of lightness, and in that there is such an exquisite beauty.
Yeah. 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 Everything much more beautiful and uh, free, unencumbered.
Simple. Yeah,
Yeah, it's how reality is. Very, very simple.
very simple.
Even the bad things that happen, the storms or the earthquakes that bury people, there's a kind of a simplicity to that,
Yeah.
and just a reality to that,
Mm.
which of course is terrible. We never want to see suffering happen. It does happen. Natural disasters happen, but there is a kind of just simplicity to it, and I'm going to stop short of saying beauty to it,
Mm.
right? Because how do you navigate the depth of suffering and people losing their kids and parents and all of it? But at the same time, if you pull our lens back, sort of to a larger view, you say, oh, these are things that happen,
Mm.
you know. Um,
What comes up for me as we speak about this is this reconciliation or the seeing of mm, like I feel one aspect that is present is the yellow aspect in the form of lightness, that there is a sense of lightness, a fundamental sense of lightness, and a recognition of the inevitability of life, the happenings of life, also on the whole spectrum of the human experience, right? And
mhm,
in that
mhm.
there can be such a detached sense of freedom. And then you also bring in the aspect of compassion, of concern, of consideration, of you know when if someone suffers losing a friend to an earthquake, the amount of suffering that can be in that. Um, and I also notice nowadays, particularly within spiritual teachings and also spiritual discourse, there's a, there in today's age there is a lot of emphasis on compassion, for instance, consideration, and also how I feel it also brings in the notion of narcissism, grandiosities, being self-serving as opposed to being considerate and kind and all of that.
Yes.
How do you see um, our limitations as human beings in the context of that we can't choose how we respond to events, in the sense that response is something natural that comes in the moment. and
Yes.
and some people might say, I mean, in that situation you should be compassionate. We're at the funeral, you should be sad, or you should be this way or the other. I feel that there is a nuance to that perspective, and which also can bring in the superego on very deep levels, in terms of, oh, you should be compassionate. That's the spiritual way of being, or else you are a grandiose spiritual being. Do you see this? Do you see the what I'm talking about here?
Well, I think so. I
Yeah.
mean, well, of course, the most important thing is to simply be aware of where you are, um, aware of what are you manifesting,
Yeah.
you know, um, and that's one way in which the map we have is very, very helpful. We start to understand what is it to have a self-centered perspective. I mean, the idea I should be compassionate will tend to make one be compassionate, do something to be compassionate, but it will make uh, them doing it. You see,
Yeah.
rather than it just arising. Um, so be understanding where you are, feeling and knowing that, oh, I feel I should be doing something or other, that should always catch our attention, and we just kind of stop. When you catch that, it means you are occupying where you are, you're awake to and interested in. This is where, is it your mind that's recognizing that? Your heart is recognizing that? What's recognizing that? I think it's a combination of things. I don't like to pin it down and say, oh, it's this or it's that, but there's something that's awake to it and is impacted by seeing that. And then you kind of stop. And then you see, okay, if I stop, what might happen more naturally,
Mm.
you know? And what it might do is it might make us be not so much, um, let's say, compassionate in a way that's, oh, I want to help you and fix that. Um, or instead, we might just simply be with that person and let naturally happen what will happen in terms of compassion. You know the difference of those. We've talked about those. It's part of the teaching, the personality's form of compassions that try to fix and I should help and right. Whereas really, if you with somebody suffering, it's more to feel their suffering with them, share it, uh, which might bring you to do something,
Mm.
but people always feel met by somebody who's more quiet than somebody who's bringing them cakes and pastries and so on. You know, I mean, that's just one thing that your description, brought me to.
Yeah.
So,
What it evokes for me, what you're speaking about, is the level of maturity that is required to be a truly authentic and freely flowing human being. Because within our society, there's so many ideals, also within spiritual communities, ideal way of being. This is how you should be, which connects to the superego. Uh,
yeah,
so to show up in a way that is authentic, where one is really I mean, you also bring in a dimension that is transcendent to the doer, or transcendent to the content of experience, because there is that meta awareness that is continuously exploring its own experience of life as
and,
it's unfolding.
and I'll say that the meta awareness is what develops more and more over time after hundreds of instances of understanding oneself and their, so like you said in a spiritual community, oh, I should be more uh, aware, or I should be more present, or right, I should be this, I should be whatever. Just recognizing that, right?
Yeah.
There is a place for aspiring to something and wanting to change kind of our reactivity, our habitual responses, and so on. So there is a wish for that, and we do apply will in some sense to
Mm.
to doing that, but it takes a long time. Then you see the meta awareness, as you nicely articulated it, is the one that's unattached, really. Um, and I would say that for most of us, the more we want to develop in that meta awareness is to engage it and to realize, our meta awareness is always aware when, okay, there I go, I'm reacting that particular way again. There it is again. There it is again. But each time, and now we get back to the question of private sessions, for instance.
Mm.
That's a place where somebody can say, and they're less likely to say it in a small group in public way. Boy, I just keep doing this thing over and over and over again. In other words, we can easily share places where we just feel like totally flummoxed and you know unable to get past certain things.
Yeah.
And there, with a teacher who knows you, again, the advantage because it's somebody who's known you for a long time, they will have some kind of meta awareness of you
Yeah.
that will, give rise to, I don't want to say the right question, but I mean, because, it's not a good way to think of it, but rise to the organic question, really, of what might be happening to open it up a little more. So I'm sort of speaking to the long-term um, nature of working with our, familiar self and working with it with someone who really knows your familiar self and really gets to know you more and more over time. So, but also things can happen quickly too. I'm not saying only are there. I'm saying though that over time, it's a long time really for our familiar, usual self to, um, you know, be less in control.
Hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned there, so we have the meta awareness, which is in some sense an unchanging phenomenon that is always aware, yet at the same time, with from this dimension of this meta awareness, there is dynamism, in the sense that there is recognition, there is understanding that takes place, there is interest, different aspects of essence can manifest, and so forth. And then you also spoke about aspiration. I notice in myself, and also I can imagine in a lot of young people that are in the earlier stages of life, there can be a lot of drive to evolve, to grow, to develop.
Yeah.
How do you see that force, that drive, and what place does it have in life in general? And also, how, would you say that that drive is still there for you?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, I mean, early in life, as you say, we're in our 20s. We're 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 really still discovering what we are on the ego level. People are finding out more what they like, what they don't like, and who they like, and what they're capable of, and what their capacities are. And so that's such a rich time. And parenthetically, now I'm sad for the current generations of people who have been impacted by COVID, um, in terms of it keeping people apart. When you're in your 20s, you need to be interacting. That's how we're developing and learning what we are and what we have and what we can do and all of that business. And then there's the whole question of interaction through devices, which is our computers and phones, which we didn't have when I was in my formative years either. But so I think that also impacts our explorations and discovery, because it, in some sense, becomes a little less personal. The interaction through devices and computers and so on. And I also allow that my particular um, history that way might tend to miss great advantages to those things. In fact, I'm going off on tangents now, I realize, but this latest discoveries that are coming out with artificial intelligence are stunning. Um, the chatbot that you can ask to write you a letter, and it'll do it. And then you can chat back to it and say, make it a little more personal. And it does it. And it does it really well. And then you do a little bit of, so these are amazingly cool new things that we have. And I get kind of excited about, partly because I've got kids who are in that phase now. You know, um, my kids were born later in life for me, and so that's an exciting thing to watch, and it makes me more interested in all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I think I took a side trip from your question.
Yeah, so my question is, do you still feel a drive towards development, towards more refinement, that you're actually and actualizing more of your potential in a personal way?
I don't feel it in the same way as I did in the beginning. And I think some of that is situational. Um, in the early days of the school and the development, my relationship with Hamid, let's say, um, there was a lot of dedication. It was a brand new thing. It's like a brand new world, really, we're discovering. Um, Lots of unknown. And so that was really intense and fiery for a very long time. Other things came into the one's, let's say, my sphere of influence. Let's say I wanted to teach, I wanted to share this with other people, and that takes time. It takes energy. It takes organizational skills. It takes taking risks. So, within 6 or 7 years, really, of starting with Hamid, I started teaching in other places. I was sort of um, I was entrepreneurial. I was also wanting to do good and wanting to, appear good and, oh, I can teach this. And so, that was part of that whole period of time. Um, so that wasn't in its nature the purity of just developing my own um, various frontiers of, right, because I was just, I won't say distracted by, but engaged in doing a lot for that. Going to Europe was a big transition right around 1990, I think, and so for several years we were just doing that, going to Europe, teaching in Germany and so on, and getting things going there. And then I had kids starting in 1998, and um, that was something I dearly wanted to do
Hmm.
and really paid a lot of attention to. And so, in some ways, that um, it's not about distraction. It's more about you have multiple things you love,
Yeah.
um, and yet, I won't say, "Oh, I stopped caring about developing my personal perspective." No, I learned a ton by in through having kids. Actually, um, learned a lot about many things, not just about love and paying attention and doing good things and so on. We developed many friendships through the parents of other kids in the school, not in the school, outside of the school. And when I say in the school, I mean the schools that our kids attended.
Yeah.
If my kid was an athlete, I was at his or her events and meeting parents. And so that really broadened in a large way my, um, I don't want to just say friend group, but um, context. Um,
Yeah.
and there was a tremendous amount of learning from that because, there's a tendency maybe to kind of focus on the group where your spiritual group. And in the beginning, it was much more that all my friends, everybody I interacted with, were part of this school, and we're doing this together, and we're developing the enterprise. I remember early on, I used to call it the enterprise. This is this work we're doing. It's the enterprise, and of course, there was the play on the Starship Enterprise.
Ah.
And then, of course, Hamid was very much of a Trekkie guy. So the enterprise, we're doing that. I
Yeah.
still I still kind of feel that way
Yeah.
because we are trying to navigate a ship of
Yeah.
sorts. That's an embodiment or a structure, a vehicle through which the teaching that we so know and love can happen. Um,
Can I ask a question on
go ahead.
that?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's clear that many of the senior teachers, the first teachers and students of the Diamond Approach, are growing older,
yes.
arriving in their 70s, 80s, and so forth. Where do you see the teaching going, this spaceship going over the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I love the question. It's of course something I think about every day.
Hmm.
Um, it's true that we are aging, um, and we will disappear. As one of my friends put it, he said, "There's a big die off coming, of the original people who were engaged with the school." Um, and I would say the nature of it has changed over time, has become uh, a sizable, complex organization, many challenges, having to do mostly with just changes in our culture and computer science and how does one let people know about what we do. That's an area that I'm dealing with now in Boulder, because the Colorado School is a shared directorship between myself and another teacher in the school, and she has everything from the Diamond Heart 7 back in time, and my job involves I think it was 8 and back, just Diamond Heart 9 and forward, meaning what's going to happen in the future. So that's why I think about it every day. And for a long time, actually, and I've been director of that for a few years. It was all interrupted by the COVID because nobody knew what the hell we're going to do. COVID and then the fire and so on. So now all of a sudden, having a new building, it's much more, you know, on my mind. But I've always been thinking about what's the future. So one thing, well, first of all, let's just start with the basics. I think that the teaching is so solid, and it's solid in its just in its nature, in the fact that what it is what actually we are. Everyone is, even though we don't know it day to day. The more we're just engaged with things in the usual way, right? So the depth of the teaching, the power of the teaching, what's available through it is just totally unassailable. I think the difficulty is, will the teachers be good in the future? Will the teachers embody and really understand enough of it to, continue it? I'm not expressing concern or doubt about that. I'm just saying I don't really know.
Yeah, makes
Because
sense.
obviously with Hamid's understanding and knowledge and depth and so on, where he comes from, not everyone does. And so we need to have, vesicles of human souls that can uh, know that source deeply enough to continue transmitting it, continue teaching it. So that's one thing. But then there's also changes in the culture. One of the things we're addressing here in Colorado is that we know that we need younger people to be engaged. Each time a new teacher training has started over the years, I think the demographic, the age average, the median age has increased. You see, because it's sort of an aging population in the school. We have not gotten as many young people coming in as I think is important.
Yeah.
So we're going to do something about that. One thing we're going to do is there's a person in the mid-region group that I'm also part of who understands a lot about focus groups. Do you know what focus groups are? Do you have that terminology where you are?
No.
If you want to sell something from business, if you want to sell something, you have a widget, you have a new kitchen sponge, you know, you bring in people from the demographic who are likely to buy it, and you ask them about it. What would you like it to have? How would it work? What's best for this
Okay, I
particular
got you.
thing? And based on what people say, oh, you make it orange instead of green or whatever, because people are telling you what their market wants.
Yeah.
We're going to do, something that has that underlying principle by doing focus group with younger people like you,
Yeah.
but not necessarily you, although I might actually want to invite you to that, and whoever else. And that was why I wrote to you actually a few weeks ago about this question.
Yeah.
So maybe I even mentioned this whole thing to you, but I don't think I probably said anything about the focus group part. Anyway, we'll have people come. Our newest Diamond Heart group here in Colorado has a handful of people who are young. It's kind of new.
Hmm.
in the early days, in 1970s, we were all in our 20s. Everybody. It might have been somebody in their 30s or early 40s. There were some who were a little bit older, but mostly we were pretty young.
Can I
And
say
that
something to that?
helped. The exponential growth was crazy. It was
Yeah.
so good. Um, and we had the energy. We were going to develop this, and my entrepreneurial going to Chicago and going to Charlottesville and and then ultimately Boston, which ended up being the most um, traction group that started. Go ahead.
So one thing that comes to me then is it's one I think is one factor that comes to me is that young attracts young and old attracts old. I
Yeah,
think that there is a real thing to that because if you look at it in the beginning, Hamid was in his late 20s, early 30s. So
he's 2 years older than me.
exactly. So obviously he will attract a lot of young people um, into that mix and some older people who are turned on and so forth. While now the majority of teachers are in their later years, which again attracts older generation people who have a particular set of interests, particular culture. And for me personally, I notice in myself that I want to dive into the teaching as deeply as I can. Meaning,
Yes.
I want to absorb, I feel that my soul is hungry for the deepest teachings in this school, right? I'm
I,
super curious and I'm available for it.
I feel that in you as we're
Yeah.
talking. You recognize that, yes.
And one limitation that I'm confronted with is that I'm a part of the Diamond Heart Online group, which is 1 to 2 years into the teaching. So for instance, I can't attend the Eindhoven Asilomar retreats because I'm not eligible, for instance. So for
Not yet.
me, that has not yet, right? But that has been a bit saddening for me because my soul really wants to be there. My heart really wants to be there. For example, and I would like to increase my engagement with the teaching because I love it so much. I see the brilliance of it. I see the robustness of it. I see how rigorous it is, and I want to participate in that. Yet some of the restrictions hinders me from engaging even more and accessing parts of the teaching that I feel would be very stimulating to me. Um, and another example is um, right now I know there is a dive program happening and also a teacher training coming up. And I don't know if I will be eligible for it, even though my soul wants to be there, not primarily only to become a teacher, but I feel that becoming a teacher will also allow me to go deeper into the teaching. So for me, this is the primary orientation that I have.
Yeah.
So that just came up spontaneously while we were speaking about it because I can just speak from my own personal experience here.
You're absolutely right that the older in us tend to attract older people. We need young people. We need young teachers. We have some.
Yeah.
We have some, I will say, rising stars here and there, people who are going to be able to attract younger people. I do trust in that, and that comes back to your question about, okay, how do I see the future? And I think it does depend on young people, and so we have some of that, not enough yet,
So
right?
so what would be your
But those people will. In fact, you will know some of them, I'm sure already,
yeah.
and so you know that's a bright spot for the future because again it depends a lot on the teacher really knowing and when I say knowing I mean really embodying and understanding but also coming from a place that they are able to articulate and transmit actually the sense of the depth of the teaching has to be that.
Okay, yeah, I hear you 100%. For me, that makes complete sense and the level of embodiment. But what would you like? What is your response to my particular situation in terms of how you view it and the structures that has been in place, that's developed and been, yeah,
I think we will, well, I'll say I hope, to whatever extent I'm engaged
yeah,
still,
Yeah.
I will find you. I will find people. I will be looking for people. I will be supporting people. I will be a champion for people who have that kind of interest. And presumably, hopefully, we will find structures that make it more and more possible for people to really do what they want to do. You just happen to get in recently, you see.
Yeah.
And but I think I'll just say, Wazee, there's a lot of runway
Yeah.
for you.
But that
You
would
have
be the case for most young
a,
people.
first of all, you have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if actually if you have a lot of time, lifetime coming, God willing, as we say,
Yeah.
but also, you have the wish and the love to do it. So, that will work for you, I'm sure. There might be structures that are current.
Yeah.
Those structures can change.
Yeah. So one another thing that comes to me on this is because I have or a sense of people that I young people in my environment that are also in the school where I feel I can see their potential. I can see how they're really curious and engaged. And one thing that comes to me when we speak about this, and one thing that I would like is like how the school recognize that and really invests in those people, that they really lend out a hand and say, "Come, we'll bring you on this journey to really." The resources that is contained within the senior teachers for that to also come into the young people, because I know a lot of the senior teachers now, they don't take on new students, for instance. I know one young human being in his early 20s, he requested or he wanted to work with one of the senior teachers, but then usually the answer is they're not available because they're working with the people that they've always been working with. So that's another consideration that comes to me, like where's the linkage between the old generation and the young generation, and how's the balance there, so that also the people with the highest level of embodiment are also connected with the youngest crowd, so that that transmission can happen
That is
directly.
a great point. That is a really great, great, great point. And it's partly why I wrote to you. You see, I started investigating what we called the Youth Council here in Colorado. It was here in the US. It wasn't just Colorado. And then I remember having a meeting with them at some point several years ago, I think I mentioned to you. And then I was told that kind of not as much was happening, at least according to one person who had been part of it. They said, oh, in Europe. And then because I had the sense, I knew that you were younger. I didn't know you were in DHR1, but that's why I wrote to you.
Yeah.
Somebody must have tipped me off that you were part of that in Europe. So that's why I wrote to you. So, the focus group thing is exactly for that. You see,
Yeah.
I want to bring together people, whether they're in Europe or here. We are just in the process of putting that together. So one thing I will ask of you
Yeah.
is if you could let me know, send me a list of names and email addresses and of people who are younger who we could include in such a focus group.
Yeah.
One of the things that will be we need to be open to is changes of how we do groups, how we teach. For instance, it could be that we find out, and again, I'm fully open to recognizing I don't know what we're going to find, but I would like to put you all in a room. And there is a woman I think I started to mention in the mid-region group here who knows how to run focus groups, and she'll talk with you all, and
Yeah.
she'll ask you the right questions, and then we'll find out. Oh, turns out we really should have groups that are on Tuesday and Thursday nights or something. The tradition has been a weekend, not just the weekends that you're doing in DHR1, but a full weekend. So you had to commit to Saturday and Sunday, and now many of us were adding Friday night. So we have this, focused work for 5 days or a few days, and then there are 5-day retreats and all these formats that I'm sure you're aware of, and you
Yeah.
probably you could do, right? But DHO1 is done the way it's done because so people in Europe can be part of it because you're asleep when it's 2 in the afternoon here.
For sure.
Um,
And yeah,
but anyway, so we need to do that.
yeah,
We need to find out what's going to work best.
yeah.
Not only that, I would like to. One of my thoughts actually is that I'm going to slow down teaching meetings. Um, I mean, at some point I'll just have to, but I think I'm starting to entertain intentionally doing that and doing more private sessions with people and not having it just be people I worked with forever. So
Yeah.
that goes directly to your question. And I agree with you. The younger people need to have some context of working with some of the older teachers. Now, whether that would happen only in a private session context, it's possible. It's one option. There might also appear the importance of doing something new for people in your demographic of interest in youth and so on, where we do some kind of group interactions or mentoring or
Yeah.
uh,
Many possibilities.
answering questions, bringing the perspective, because I know that I have a kind of, I'm going to say by now, baked in perspective of the work, not baked in ego perspective. I'm not saying that's gone, but you know, that I have a knowledge and understanding that will be good to be able to share.
Yeah.
So I think all of the older teachers, and so that's one of the things I'm doing here is talking to the older teachers here about this. We're going to start having them do like a monthly presentation here. So let's say if we needed 12 people for 1 year to do those, around here we have enough people that each person would just do something once a year. So that's not burdensome for somebody who's in uh, sort of a pulling back slash retirement kind of mode, right? So I'm trying to organize it in a way that those people can do something, but it's not too much. Things like that.
I hear you. So, which I think is great. And for me, the main reflection that comes to me is like investing in the young generation and with resources, with time, with consideration, with energy. That's what comes to me, and I really believe that will, accelerate the young people's development, and
Hmm.
also it will make them feel valued and seen within the context of the school. Uh,
Yeah.
that's just what comes to me. I don't.
Well, I love that perspective.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that needs to happen. I remember that the youth council here in the U.S. One impression I had of it, and again, it's like maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Um, they were also a little reticent to have older teachers engaged with them in a certain way. They were kind of feeling like, no, 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 we got to kind of stick together here, and they didn't want the influence of these parental figures or something. There was some kind of a thing like that. I don't know exactly what it was, but I remember it was the person who invited me into that one meeting I had with them had said, well, they don't really want to have much, you know, influence from the older, it was sort of like some kind of parental oversight. I think it was at a time when hierarchy in the school was being recognized and resisted and so on. And, so I'm enlivened by your representing that, you guys, I'm saying you guys generally would like that. And I think that's probably one of the most important functions we have of the older generation of teachers.
yeah. And the vision that comes to me is that if that was made possible, that the wisdom of the elders was transmitted effectively to the youngers, then the young generation would accelerate, you could say, their process, and thereby teach, become embody the teaching to a higher degree earlier, which again would lead to attracting more young people. So
Yes,
there would be a positive cycle there.
yes, I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So this is
Uh,
what's coming from me. From me.
all right, good.
Yeah.
No, you're on it. I like how you think and how you feel and how you not just think and feel, but how I feel your sincerity
Yeah. Yeah.
and um, you know, I appreciate it. And that's one element or one element that's just so important that
Yeah.
we're doing it to share.
Yeah.
We're doing it out of love, but also out of great curiosity. And what is this actually? You know, so
Yeah.
so keep me in mind. There are people there, you feel they want to do something. Um, you know, I'm
You're available.
I'm all about it. Yeah.
Wonderful. And actually, on this note, I feel it's relevant to talk about is because we speak about structures. Sometimes things that can hinder development is, for instance, outdated structures. So structure that serve a function for a certain period of time, and then they become then they haven't renewed, so
Yeah.
that they actually hinder growth because they haven't been updated. The software hasn't been updated, or the hardware hasn't
Yes.
been updated. So
Good.
I really feel that is thoroughly important aspect of this. Yeah.
So I'm a bit structure averse myself.
Yeah.
Um, there are structures that are support and do something, and then I suppose structures that outlive their usefulness.
Yeah. And also this is coming up for the first time as directly as it is with a teacher for me now. This is the first time it's emerging with so
Good.
directly that it's doing right now. So, but I reckon maybe having another meeting where I can talk about some of the other things that I have in mind, that I also know that some of the other people in the youth council feel themselves, so that we can, allocate some time to really going into that in
That
detail.
would be great. I would love to do that.
Okay, yeah. So I suggest we do that. Um,
Okay. Yeah. You just let me know.
Wonderful, and I'm very very happy to have connected with you, and I really hear your sentiment for this, and that you have you genuinely care about this movement, and that you have a lot of generosity for
Mm,
for this next phase of the school's development.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Means a lot to me. I mean, it's been most of my life. Started in a career as a science guy, and pretty soon this is all I've done for most of the time.
yeah, it's amazing. So can I ask you, where do you find yourself right in this moment?
Right now,
Yeah.
I'm very happy talking to you.
Hmm.
Um, I am sharing with you in the excitement and love and respect actually you are bringing and have for the teaching and the history of it, and your interest in me and my contribution and so on. I mean, I'm very 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 much appreciating that. And so right now I'm mostly immersed in that, in a kind of it's not just excitement, it's appreciation. uh, as we speak, I become more settled, actually, because, um, if I may say, um, I feel uh, you, in particular, um, to be a bright spot, really, in the future for the school. And I'm not saying just you personally. I don't know you ins and outs of Wazee, right? But I am aware of your intelligence and your heart for it all. and then but I'm also connecting you with other people you've alluded to who are also younger and in your area. And so I feel kind of, you see, hope isn't exactly the right word because hope implies it was hopeless or something, but the sense of optimism, let's say. I feel optimistic for the future because I don't normally interact with people of your age who have the kind of recognition, let's say, of what this is.
mm,
That clearly informs your questions and your interests.
mm,
Are you asking about this moment? That's what's here, this moment.
mm. And what comes up for me as you speak this, I'm really in resonance and in deep touch with that sense of recognition, which I feel that we're both sharing in that moment. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, I feel what comes to me, I feel us to be in a cathedral, actually, where
Mm-hmm.
there is such a deep reverence for the teaching and for the um, I mean it's such a incomprehensible level of intelligence, refinement. Um, I can't really find the word for it. Like the seeing, and I really feel that in you as well. I mean, having been on the path for 50 years, exploring this territory within the lens of the diamond approach, and then having your whole life being transformed through the path, the diamond path, the jeweled path. And then I can imagine what that will do to a soul in terms of maturing the heart and maturing that sense of recognition of seeing the incomprehensible value that this teaching brings to humanity in this
Mm-hmm.
very special time of, of,
Yeah.
of great difficulty. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mostly relaxes the soul, I'll say, in such a way that um, we can just feel the central preciousness of
Mm,
not just of the teaching. You say cathedral. Cathedral's a big thing. It's a big structure, for our usual mind. But you didn't mean it as a small cathedral. I know,
mm,
or like a kind of ineffable space that um, has a um, sort of mind quieting stillness to it. But not just that. Like the mind quieting stillness, uh, same time allows for full potential
mm,
of everything and anything, while the everything and anything still just remain as quiet, uh, but there and possible. Somehow known in a way that's not your mind knowing it. What is that to know there's potential? Like there's everything and at the same time nothing.
mm.
Everything and nothing at once, the same breath. You recognize that. And that, right? So those are the kind of mysteries that are so exciting in a way to
Mm,
discover.
definitely. Yeah, I notice how my soul also lights up with that discovery and that recognition. And it also connects me with this view how I see the Diamond approach as the explorer's path. I mean, it's really a path for explorers, people want to explore reality. And when we consider the archetype of the explorer, some of the primary elements to that is curiosity, interest, adventure. It's not about getting somewhere. This it's a genuine love for truth and all of that. So
Yeah, yeah. There isn't expectation. There isn't preconception about what you're going to find if you're really an explorer.
yeah.
You know, and that's what science is about. When I first met him, that's what I was. I was exploring. I was exploring the nature of a certain immunologic phenomenon. You know, um, that you just you can have all kinds of knowledge and understanding about how that whole system works and all the different types of cells and molecules and all that kind of stuff, but you have to stay with the mind that you just don't know what you're going to find.
Hmm.
You really don't. You have to be open to surprise.
Not
And in fact, that's one of the things they say. You say to a young scientist, careful with your predictions, because if you have predictions of how this is going to go, that will push you in the direction of designing your experiment such that your prediction, your brilliant mind is, you think you have your brilliant mind. You see, your prediction of what this is going to show us, you could easily design your experiments to show it. And then it's like, oh, look at me. I knew what this was going to be. You can't do that.
mm,
And that comes back to what your first question about the private sessions and the value of a private session. And when I was talking to you about how I feel the best way to prepare a student for exploring themselves is to tell them, don't have any idea. We don't know what's going to happen here. You don't go overboard with that with somebody because they'll think you could think you're a little nutty. But to have the person and just say, no, you just lie down on your back and we'll just have you breathe a little bit, and let's see what happens. And I'll tell them it's good to get out of your vertical perspective. The vertical perspective is more our thinking mind and predictive mind and all of that. The horizontal perspective helps to sort of you're nudging the person a little bit to being open to, okay, what am I going to find? Okay.
yeah, full circle. And I know.
That, in spite of the fact that we have this very detailed, um, I'm calling it map, but you know, of how the mind works and how reality is and how our mind's uh, tendency to navigate through things based on history,
Hmm.
can be explored and brought out such that we remove those obstacles of familiar history and assumption and discover things that we wouldn't necessarily think of. We couldn't think of. And yet, at the same time, we recognize them when they show up. You notice that?
Yeah. Yet at the same time.
It's like all you got to do is say to somebody, okay, we're studying compassion here, and make a distinction between the usual compassion where people think they're being helpful and they're saying, oh, you're feeling okay, and let me do this for you and do this for you, blah, 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 versus, okay, I'm just going to sit here with you for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Everyone who got a little tiny bit of awakeness recognizes that distinction, and so it's not like you're going, oh yeah, compassion. That's a really spiritual thing. Actually, what seems to be spiritual in that sense is not. you won't call it spiritual. I mean, we call it that because it's something people don't usually experience.
Mm.
So it's spiritual in the sense it's outside of normal, familiar functioning. And
Yeah.
yet, when you find it, then you go, oh, of course. But then it also will have a sense of uh, specialness to it,
Mm.
but it's outside of the habitual and also just the right thing for the
Just
moment.
yeah. So precious.
Same with all of those qualities. Same with the will. We think, oh, I'm going to do it. And then somehow you find out at some point, Jesus, it all just kind of happens on its own.
Mm.
Everything I'm trying to make happen and I'm struggling with and I'm pushing and just let go. Things can happen on their own. You wouldn't think of that, but when you actually learn that, it's like, oh, of course.
I'm aware that we're coming up to 2 hours now,
We are, yeah. Okay.
and you have something on, right?
Oh, I delayed something.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. But I feel this is a wonderful place to round off the episode, just to keep in time.
Sure.
I want to thank you, Duncan, for coming on. I was so much looking forward to meeting you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your journey and the wisdom and the knowledge that you share with us.
Yeah. I want to thank you too for putting this together.
Mm, thank you.
So I think it's a really good service, for many reasons. And so I'm just really appreciating that and you. And I look forward to talking with you more when you feel the time is right.
Mm, definitely. I feel that.
Happy to do that. I'd love to assist in any way I might.
Mm, thank you.